as I mentioned, all of this new field of yoga as a neuroscience regulation tool comes from the advances in science. Neuroimaging of the brain has provided amazing information about what's happening in the brain in real time while someone is living their life. And then the awareness of the physiology of the autonomic nervous system, which is the system that where different functions go on in the body without our conscious control, such as the heartbeat and, digestion and lots of other things. And then the study of animal behavior is also relevant here. Dr. Peter Levine, uh, who's been a pioneer in this field, has looked at animal behavior as a way to inform what's happening in the human nervous system. So there's a foundational belief that's come from all of this background information, and it is that unresolved trauma, either long-term or in the moment, dysregulates the autonomic nervous system. And so a person may lose the ability to connect with themselves, with their environment, or with other people, either temporarily or partially on a long-term basis. And so that resolution is happens most effectively working with the autonomic nervous system directly. So there's all kinds of, I mean, I don't know if you are all psychotherapists or counselors or yoga teachers, yoga therapists, physical therapists, whatever it is. Um, it's the same dysregulation that your clients are dealing with or your patients, and the theory is that it requires a somatic intervention. It requires healing on the physical level. That talk therapy may work for people who aren't deeply traumatized, but it's not that effective for people who have some nervous system pattern of dysregulation. So that's something to remember. So this may be a review for some people, or it may be new information, but because we're looking now at the autonomic nervous system, which I wasn't taught at all about in all of my undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate education. But so it may be your first exposure. I don't know. Anyway, the autonomic nervous system is composed of two major branches: the sympathetic nervous system, which, when it's functioning well, it gives us energy and focus to live our lives. But when it's not, when it feels threatened, it starts to evolve into a fight or flight response, which we'll talk about a little later. Um, and so that's one branch. And the other branch is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is more or less the complement of the sympathetic nervous system. And its healthy function is to allow our body to rest, rejuvenate itself, and it's primarily responsible for digestion. But when it's threatened and there's no escape, then it starts to shut down the major organs of the body to conserve energy and to be still so that perhaps predators can't see the presence of this traumatized, threatened person or animal. So we can experience this in a very small way ourselves. So the idea is to first experience the fight or flight response by pressing your arms together as hard as you can until your arms might start to shake. And notice what's happening inside your body when you do that. So I'll just give you a minute to do that exercise and focus. And then when you're ready, you can release it and notice what happened in your body while you were feeling that tension. And it would be really great to me if somebody wants to write in the chat what that was like. Um, I know that for myself, I stopped breathing, and that's a very serious change. And I also just felt all the shaking in my arms, which so some tension which extended over my shoulders, um, and maybe a little bit in my chest. So then we're going to do the other side side of this experience now, the parasympathetic nervous system. So you can just let your arms dangle at your sides and just slump in the chair. You can, I don't know what you're sitting on, but if you can just release your whole body into it like I am and see how you feel. See what happens. The relaxation, the parasympathetic response takes a little bit longer than the sympathetic response. So, just ease into it and start to notice how you feel, what changes happened. Hmm. So in my case, there's a release of muscle tension, and I start to breathe more deeply, and my mind calms down, like there's not many thoughts. So that's a mini experience of these states, although you may be quite familiar with them from your life. I don't know if any of you have noticed a chronic dysregulation in your life, in your nervous system, and if you do, this yoga is particularly good for you. Okay, so these are physiological markers of healthy sympathetic nervous system arousal, which can, it's a gradual thing. It can start off just being an invigorating thing, but as it continues, it can become more drastic, with reduced blood flow to the brain. Digestion is inhibited. I'm not going to go over all of the symptoms, but they're right there if you want to pay more attention to them. Um, you can read them. There's a few more. And may these may produce difficult symptoms, but they all are serving the survival of your body, the survival of the species. That's why they were developed that way. For example, um, when the heartbeat quickens, more oxygen can be sent to the muscles where strength or ability to move may increase ability to move. When the pupils of the eyes are dilated, they can take in more information. So those are just two examples of how these all are helping the body to survive. Okay, so this is the same kind of list for the parasympathetic nervous system. The rest and it's also called rest and digest or tend and befriend. So those are some buzzwords or keywords for that state. So most of the responses are exactly the opposite of the sympathetic nervous system responses. The pupils get constricted. Um, there's an increase of movement of food through the digestive system. Um, and let's see if there's any more. Nope. So again, these are also protective. This state, when when the danger becomes overwhelming, all of these changes will help a body survive without moving and without losing too much energy. And again, that's very obvious in the animal world. And we'll see a video a little later on which addresses that. So, all through the trainings I give, I like to have people check in with their nervous system to stay in touch with exactly what's happening in their body. So, I'm going to take you through a short exercise to help you do that. Um, so, right now, start to tune into your breathing. Notice if the breath is shallow or deep. And now, shifting to your muscular tension. Do you feel a lot of tension in your arms and legs and diaphragm? And if you do, you can start to relax it by breathing maybe a little deeper if that's comfortable. And then notice your general state of mind, whether there's a lot of thoughts jumping through or whether it's fairly calm. And now you can shift your awareness to notice the contact between the back of the chair and the back of your entire body, um, and the bottom of your feet in contact with the floor. So we're noticing every point of contact. And those are significant focal points, um, to have more of a sense of your body in space, which is also a regulating activity. Okay, so you can breathe and release muscle tension. Notice the contact between the chair or couch and the feet and the floor. And now just bringing your awareness back to a normal kind of state. I'm wondering if anything has changed in your experience of yourself. I've done this exercise a million times, and every time it's engaging to me, and I do notice changes. So it's a very helpful kind of training to be in touch with what's happening in your body from moment to moment. This is called the window of tolerance, and it is a symbolic representation of a regulated nervous system. You see the two horizontal bars and then the wavy shape inside. Well, that wavy shape is the alternation of sympathetic and parasympathetic activity in the body, which alternates that way all the time in a healthy person. As you inhale, your sympathetic activity increases. It reaches its height at the top of the inhale. And then as you exhale, the wave descends. At the bottom of the wave is the greatest strength of your parasympathetic nervous system. Whoops. So this is happening in the body 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in a regulated person. And it also connects to the heartbeat and other important physiological functions. And of course, above it and below it, we find dysregulation. And I'll show you a chart about that in a moment. I just want to make sure I've covered everything. Oh, yeah. Well, it's called the window of tolerance because that's inside this area is where a person feels comfortable with themselves, their body, and the environment. Um, and so also, everyone's window is of a different width. Some people are, they get dysregulated very easily. And other people have a huge window of tolerance. They could go through, climbing Mount Everest without getting dysregulated. So um, that's part of the human experience. Okay. So this is an example of a dysregulated autonomic nervous system. There's a traumatic shock on the left side of the diagram. It creates jagged waves of uh, alternation between sympathetic and parasympathetic. These waves go above the window of tolerance and below. And in those states, on top, we're getting into anxiety, panic, other extreme states that are listed there. Below the bottom horizon there, we have the dysregulation of the parasympathetic nervous system, which looks like dysthymia, depression, disconnection, deadness. And so in a kind of a therapeutic situation or even a yoga class with people who are a little bit dysregulated, the practices will squeeze those dysregulated parts back into the window of tolerance and help it to reassume this nice, even flow. And if it's a temporary dysregulation, that's normal. But if it goes on like this for weeks, months, and years, that creates a lot of chaos in the physical body and opens the body to different chronic diseases. And that this has been proven with long-term studies of people were followed from childhood until maturity or further. And so there's data on this situation. So I had already shown you slides of normal physiological experiences in fight or flight, but these are the signs of pathological states of fight or flight, particularly if they last over a long period of time. I mean, it's normal to have these symptoms if there's something traumatic that's happened to you that, you know, that is in the moment and more temporary. Um, so again, I'm not going to go over all of them, but I think there aren't any surprises here. Um, and I think you could see how yoga could help with all of these problems. Um, the connection with the self, the balancing of the right side of the body and the left side of the body. Oops, I don't know what that is. Um, so yeah, the connection with the breath. Um, a feeling of general safety because of this, perhaps the experience of being in a yoga class with a safe teacher. There's a lot of different benefits that come from doing yoga for these states. Okay, and these are the markers of parasympathetic shutdown, which I mentioned can happen when a nervous system feels threatened and there's no escape. Um, so again, this is a list of all of those symptoms. And by the way, if any of you have had recent trauma, or if you are carrying a lot of trauma from the past, yeah, I'd like to know if any of this material is activating for you, because I want to try to make sure that everyone is doing okay and getting something out of it. So you could put a note in the chat if you are activated by anything that I say or any of the videos. Um, okay, so there's, this is a way to describe trauma, and it doesn't have to be PTSD. PTSD is a long-term trauma that doesn't resolve. But what I'm saying is applicable to someone who maybe just got a parking ticket or can't find their wallet, or there's a million ways that all of these sympathetic and parasympathetic systems get activated. So the difference between trauma and normal activation is that the activation starts to go away after a reasonable period of time. And anyway, so uh, trauma gets laid into the nervous system in a more long-term way when there aren't sufficient resources to handle whatever's happening in the moment. And I don't want to give examples right now because again it could be re-stimulating. But when that does happen, a person's memory doesn't can't work well, and they remember fragments of a situation or experience, but not the whole thing in a holistic way. So it can't be healed with all, with these fragments of memory. They just stay in the nervous system, waiting to be resolved. Um, and then when something reminds someone of that unresolved situation, the material that's still in the body unresolved can be triggered, and that is one explanation of flashbacks, which people have who do have PTSD. Um, and our states are fluid, so that someone can be shut down, like let's say in a psychotherapy session or in a yoga class, they can be shut down for 15 minutes, and all of a sudden some form of safety arrives, and then they can start to come back into the present moment and be well regulated. And then, some people are more stable than others, so that that person who felt dysregulated could then, you know, complete the yoga class and be fine, or else they may go outside and have some difficult experience, and then they'll go into fight or flight. Everyone's nervous system is different. So it's good to get to know yours and get a sense of how much support you need to stay regulated. Okay, so um, we're going to get into polyvagal theory, which you may have heard of. And one of the uh, awarenesses of polyvagal theory is how important safety is to nervous system regulation and to living a healthy, productive life. The nervous system has to feel safe. And so we have mechanisms that operate in the body unconsciously that sort of tell whether we're safe or not. We may not even be aware of them, but there are sometimes there's a tightening of the body when we walk into a certain environment, and it's a very fine-tuned ability to sense whether we're safe or not. Um, so it's always good to be in touch with yourself as much as possible so that you'll know when you're feeling unsafe rather than having it be a subconscious experience. And then we can do something about it. And again, that's where yoga can come in. Um, so, uh, by one thing I like to teach is to teach people to be aware of their regulation state moment to moment, and whenever they need to bring in some yogic experience or technique that they have learned will help them get regulated again. Like um, I I did that for a number of years in the 1970s when I was learning about yoga and relearning how to be in touch with myself. It's very effective. It's like, I don't know if any of you are psychotherapists or if you're in therapy, but the therapy experience normally is an hour a week. And then the rest of the time you're on your own. So having these kind of tools of knowing how to regulate your breath, knowing how to release your muscles, knowing what you need to do to regulate yourself is something you can do 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that to me is the magic formula for deep healing. It's a constant practice. Okay, so there are specific ways that people can help each other to heal. And so I have been speaking about self-regulation up to this point, but now I'm going to speak about co-regulation for a moment. Co-regulation happens in the perception of safety in another person. And by looking at someone's face, we get subconscious messages about whether that person is relaxed or disturbed um, through the facial muscles, the facial expression, the look around the eyes and in the eyes, the sound of the voice, and the pace of the person's breathing pattern, and a general congruency between what they say and how they move and their gestures. So we get a lot of information about other people. It sort of comes in subconsciously. And Dr. Porges, who founded polyvagal theory, called this neuroception. It's never really been named before. But so if you get around someone who you feel safe with, it's going to help you stay regulated. And it's a wonderful experience to be fully present with someone who is safe. And on the other hand, if we sense that someone is not safe for whatever reason, it's self-protective to move away from them and maybe not want to be around them too much. So we do have some agency around our nervous system state through co-regulation. And it's one thing that I try to do is to be as regulated as possible uh, when I'm teaching or when I'm doing other types of work. Although the Zoom mechanisms can get me dysregulated from time to time. Um, so are there any questions so far?
When I saw like the table, the window of tolerance, it kind of made me think of borderline personality disorder and like wanting to reframe that as like something within just dysregulation because I really hate the naming of that diagnosis, to be honest. And like maybe just reframing it as like with dysregulation and like window of tolerance. Um,
Right.
Wondering your thoughts about that.
Yeah, that's a very astute comment because this model is challenging the traditional um, diagnoses in psychiatry and reframing them, a lot of them, as dysregulation. You're right on target there. I think there are some medical conditions which may not be part of that chart of regulation and dysregulation, possibly schizophrenia. There's a few, but generally speaking, um, the all those diagnoses of anxiety, panic attacks, depression, um, shutdown, they do describe different physiological states which are diagnosed as mental illness.
Mhm.
And this has been one of the most exciting things about this new paradigm for me. I'm hoping, it's slowly gaining power in the field, but there's also a reaction against it among some conservative mental health experts. So, it's something to watch and see what happens. But yeah, particularly um, bipolar disorder.
Mhm.
It seems like it's a very deep dysregulation, so that that jagged line goes way up to the top of of the dysregulated area and then goes way down to the bottom, and the symptoms are totally different, which match those of borderline of
Yeah. Yeah, I think yeah, it feels like the only difference is like frequency and like duration of like
yeah,
how long the peaks last and like how often they oscillate and things like that.
sure, yep. So that kind of correspondence between the body and the psychiatric labels is gives me a lot of energy to keep doing this work because I would like to see that change.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Okay, so we can move on now. A little bit more about the brain. Um, This is a gross oversimplification, and if any of you are neuroscience majors or experts, I apologize, but this general chart divides the brain into three areas: the neocortex, which is where thought happens, um, and voluntary movement; the limbic brain, which governs emotions linked to attachment, expression, instincts, motivational drive. The limbic brain is very closely related to the reptilian brain, but it's not exactly the same structure. The reptilian brain, which is the dark area in the chart there with the brainstem attached there. Um, it is what governs the state of sympathetic or parasympathetic activation. Um, So, it also covers digestion, reproduction, circulation, breathing, and the execution of fight or flight. So this is the reptilian brain is the area where people who study nervous system dysregulation primarily focus on. And it is the area that's been traditionally left out of mental health services and psychotherapy and psychiatry. Um, because they have focused more on improving cognition in therapy, on recognizing emotions and on attachment. But they have left out the power of these subconscious functions of the reptilian brain, which are at the bottom of our nervous system state. Okay, that's what I just spoke about. So, it can be difficult to work with the reptilian brain, however, because it's responsible for our survival. So, different survival patterns are programmed into it throughout our life, and then some of them are very helpful, and others of them may not be, which relates to Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's video, what he's talking about. And so it's very difficult to change survival patterns because I'm sort of giving them a human voice, but they think that they need to hold on to whatever patterns they have in order to promote the survival of the person. There's only a few ways to really influence that reptilian brain, and one of them is through awareness of body sensation. The more someone can be aware of exactly what's happening inside the body, the more that primitive brain can connect with higher brain structures that can help to bring more conscious thought to the situation. And also, it can be influenced by the breath, because as I mentioned, as we inhale, the sympathetic energy rises, and as we exhale, the parasympathetic energy gets stronger. So that is a very powerful stimulus for the reptilian brain to address what's happening in the body. So let's say if you can regulate your brain, the reptilian brain will calm down. It's like the tail wagging the dog. Um, so also, like as a therapist, there's no doubt that it's easier to teach someone to change their breathing pattern than it is to teach them to change their emotional state, you know. So it's very fortunate that we have that one function which can that breathing, which can be controlled subconsciously or it can be controlled consciously. And yoga makes the most of that feature. Okay, so this is just a side note, that there are terms in the field, uh, top down, which means that a person's thought is cultivated to control the lower parts of the brain. Um, so teaching someone, a different cognition, hopefully will help them to get out of a fight or flight state. That's the theory. And it sometimes is important to do that. And then there's the bottom up approach, which starts with feeling the body sensations and being aware of them, and hope that with that awareness and with tools to regulate it, that the regulation will start um, ascending to the limbic system and finally to the cognitions, so that a person's mind won't be thinking such dire thoughts. So in somatic therapy, there's an emphasis on the bottom up approach to start with the body. But I find that both approaches are really important because our minds have a lot to offer our bodies also. So yoga does both. Like when you learn a yoga pose, it's you're first learning it in your brain and your cognitions, and then you're sending that information down to the body. And then when you're in the pose, you have an opportunity to sense deeply what's happening in the body, and that can influence the higher structures. So it goes both ways. This is like a love song to yoga for me. I praise it whenever I can. Okay, so now we're getting into a specific structure of the body, the vagus nerve. It's a cranial nerve, which means that it starts up in the head. And it's the only cranial nerve which extends down below the neck. And it's important because it's the communication channel of the parasympathetic nervous system. Um, and there's two branches of it, but I'll get to that in a minute. So one branch, the ventral vagal, starts in the back of the primitive brain, and it extends into the face. These are nerves in the face, the throat, the tongue, the eyes, the ears, and then another branch of, and the heart and the lungs, sorry, and another branch, the dorsal vagal, takes over at the diaphragm and has a big influence on our digestion and whatever structures are below the diaphragm. So those are the two branches, the vagal and the dorsal and uh, ventral. And so it's a very, very important part of regulating the nervous system. And 80% the vagus fibers, nerve fibers run to the brain, and 20% relay that information back down to the body. Now that's unusual. Most nerves are built to give information to the brain, no, to take information from the brain, but the vagus nerve is built to give information to the brain about the state of the body, and then the brain can relay that information back down to the nerves and muscles about whether the situation is safe or not. Um, so, the example is when the diaphragm is stimulated, the vagus sends a message of relaxation to the brain, and this transmits this message back down to the body. Um, so this, and I have a picture of it. Oops. See if I can bring it down. So there's the two different branches of the vagus nerve, the ventral and the dorsal, and their connections to the different nerve centers and muscles, and then the dorsal coming down into the digestive area. It also goes into the reproductive area, although that hasn't been focused on very much. So we can take an opportunity now to feel the path of our own vagus nerve. So we can start, if you'd like, by perhaps putting your hands on the back of your neck where the primitive brain resides, of course, deep inside the body. And then feeling the extension of all the cranial nerves, which control the muscles and the expression of the face and eyes and voice, hearing, um, the ways that we communicate. And then we can bring our hands down to feel the path of the vagus as it comes down to the heart and lungs, and then to the diaphragm, and then continuing down through the digestive system. And actually, the vagus nerve is in two parts. It runs down both sides of the body, but for the sake of simplicity and for the drawing, we're just seeing one side. So now that we've outlined the vagus nerve, I think it's a good time to take a few deep breaths, just feeling it from the inside. Take 3 deep breaths. And then I don't know if your awareness went inside while you were doing that breathing like mine did, or if it's, you know, if you stayed in contact with the outside, with the room and your chair and all. But it's just good for you to note that. And note if you feel any different now after taking these 3 deep breaths. If you're inclined to breathe any more deeply, geez. Um, while while you're exploring the results of that breath. Okay. So we're moving now into polyvagal theory. Dr. Porges spent years researching the function of the vagus nerve and how it affected people's behavior, particularly babies. It's an interesting story. Um, and what he came up with was, first of all, this theory of having a ventral and a dorsal vagus nerve that actually is still in the theoretical realm. It hasn't been absolutely proven biologically yet. However, the functions of them um, are so powerful. I mean, the description of it, that it's been adopted widely in many different fields of psychotherapy and medicine and organizational behavior and all kinds of things. So he focused first on the ventral vagus, the one that helps us to relate to other people and feel safe. And he calls that safety social engagement, the ability to connect with another person and feel safe and benefit from it and be regulated. Now, sometimes there's no safe person available. And when that happens, the sympathetic nervous system comes into play with its fight or flight response. And so the fight response is, the blood going to the muscles and feeling some urgency to either punch or fight something, or feeling the legs activated and running away. These are ways to deal with the situation and get out of it. Um, so that's the second level of defense. If there's no safe person, if it's not a safe environment, we go to the sympathetic nervous system and we fight or fly or flee our way out of that dangerous situation. Now, if fighting or fleeing is not possible, um, and again, I don't want to mention situations, but it is true sometimes. Then we move into the dorsal vagus, that part of the vagus nerve that gets activated below the diaphragm, which shuts down digestion, reduces blood flow to the brain, which can produce, let's see what it's called, dissociation. That's the physiological part of dissociation. And eventually, if safety doesn't appear, then it reduces blood flow to the brain and produces a state of immobility and dissociation. So this is very obvious in the animal kingdom. Like when animals are threatened, I'm sure you've all seen either a bunny rabbit or a squirrel freeze when it's apparently when it feels unsafe, and it can stay that way for a long time with no movement. And then when it feels safe again, it can suddenly burst out of that immobility and run away. It's kind of conserved energy to be able to do that. And in humans, it manifests a little differently. It manifests as fainting, or as just total dissociation, so that a person may not be able to talk, they may not be sure where they are. Um, so these are the three levels that Dr. Porges describes in polyvagal theory, which are hierarchical, and they help to explain human behavior in a lot of situations. Um, so that's basically what it is. And then, um, and then uh, in his theory, he's found ways to help people become safe again. One of them is through special music that is programmed to provide a feeling of safety through the ears, and which affect the whole nervous system. Um, so I wanted to introduce you to Dr. Porges. I have three videos, I think, from the three most influential pioneers in this field: Dr. Van der Kolk, Dr. Porges, and then Peter Levine, who developed um, somatic experiencing, which, okay. And when you're finished with that, just bring your eyes back to the screen. Notice if there's any change in the way you're experiencing yourself or change in your eyes. And then I'll go back into the slideshow. Oh, by the way, I almost forgot. It's almost time to take a break. Is there anyone who wants to take the break now, or would you prefer uh, having another 10 or 15-minute program and then taking a break? Can anybody respond to that?
I think I would prefer to finish the talk about the animals and then take a
Oh,
break.
did you like the video
Yeah.
about the animal?
Yeah. I guess like in a connected note, I am interning with Heartlight Center. So I conduct a lot of grief groups, and I was reading The Grieving Brain a couple months ago by Mary Frances O'Connor, and she also uses a lot of examples of how animals showcase they grieve in their bodies. And like that was kind of my favorite part of the book, just to kind of find those like natural connectors between us and other living things and how our brains and bodies work. So
Oh, well, that sounds really interesting. I'll be reading that book too.
cool.
Uh, hey, anybody else want to chime in here? All right, so I'll go back to the video, the PowerPoint for a while, if I can find it. It looks like that's it. Okay. Uh, all right. Are there any other comments about this video?
I really, again, with the animals, appreciate the perspective that it brings on just the different visualization of how they're reacting, the fight flight response, and being able to associate it with that visual of the animals. That really was kind of a little bit of a light bulb moment for me.
Like those impalas running around?
Yes, exactly right.
The part that was the most impactful on me was seeing the videos of the soldiers actually out in battle and what happens to some of them to their nervous system, um, when they're actually fighting. I've never seen videos before of actual war. Yeah, that kind of environment is tremendously dysregulating, and it can stay with a person for the rest of their life. So that's one of the fallouts from war. So yeah, I one of my visions or my wishes is that this type of approach would become so popular and well known in this culture that safety, interpersonal safety, would become a priority in all levels of government, all social interactions. That would be a wonderful thing. So you know, people agree. Okay, let's see what's happening here. All right. So there are different models of stages of dysregulation, more than just fight, flight, or freeze. And this is one of those models. It's the one I like the best. It's by a researcher named Kozlowska. I think I have the actual article reference somewhere. Anyway, so this researcher developed these different stages of dysregulation by watching people, in her private practice of therapy, and so this gives you a little more detail into the different dysregulated states. So in this model, the first one is called arousal, and it's a sympathetically activated state.
Joanne, can I interrupt you for a moment? Could you unshare and reshare? We seem to be seeing just the top bar of the spreadsheet or
Okay,
of the slides. I'm sorry.
that's interesting. All right, I'll sure will. Yeah. Thank you for telling me.
Of course.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Well, thank you. So this arousal is a very brief period. Like if something attracts someone's attention, or you can imagine it as an animal, it's suddenly, let's see, you hear a loud siren. Suddenly you stop and you kind of look around like, where's that coming from? That's the arousal period they're talking about. It's brief. And then if it seems like it's a danger signal, then in the next stage, the fight or flight response will get activated. And again, that's a sympathetic branch activity. So a person may, like I said, either run in the other direction or they might stay there and, feel angry or, whatever the situation is. All right. So if that gets resolved, if the person is able to run away or fight, then everything's cool. The nervous system goes back into regulation. However, if it doesn't, then the nervous system goes deeper into a freeze response, which is, again, this dorsal vagus getting activated. It's a different structure in the body. And again, that freeze response in this model is brief. And during that response, both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic are activated at the same time. And that is possible. So the activation of the sympathetic shows up by tense muscles. That's a sign of sympathetic activation. And the parasympathetic activation shows up in not being able to move, like a freeze. So it's both happening at the same time. And then again, if the problem gets resolved to some degree, if a person starts feeling safer, then they'll go back into a fight or flight response briefly, and then go back into arousal briefly, and they'll be fine. They'll be regulated. But if the threat is still there and it doesn't get resolved, then stage 4 starts to get activated, tonic immobility. It means it's a little bit like the freeze response, but there's no tense muscles. It means that the person has trouble moving, like not physically trouble moving, but the whole nervous system is starting to shut down. And let's see what that says. So, that's a deep state for a human being. That's where most humans are who are just dissociated or unable to connect with people. And so hopefully some type of safety will show up, or some kind of regulating activity. And then the person will feel better, feel safer, and start going back into stage 3, 2, and 1. However, if that doesn't happen, in some cases, it's rare in humans, but if that continues, there might be such a withholding of blood to the brain that the person faints. And that does happen in trauma. I actually was in a car accident, and at the moment of impact, it wasn't my fault. At the moment of impact, I fainted. So I have no memory of the actual moment of impact. So I have a personal memory of it. And then, if the person survives, or this is actually more common in animals to have a collapsed immobility, where it looks like they're dead. They just have no movement, no breathing, no signs of life. So, if the human survives all of that, then they go into a period called quiescent immobility, where they're slowly regaining their ability to move and to have the energy to get up and start, start some activity again. So the last 3 stages here are that parasympathetic dorsal vagal shutdown. So if you want to have a detailed explanation of this process, here it is. Okay. So I think we'll do another brief check-in with our nervous system, and then we'll take a break. So once again, notice your breathing rate and depth. Notice your muscle tension and your general state of mind. And notice the contact between the back of your body and whatever you're sitting on, and the bottom of your feet and or some surface. And take a few breaths. Take 3 breaths.